Hey everyone, this is Morgan here. In this video, I'm going to walk you through a potential solution for Lab 1. In Lab 1, you had to create an S3 bucket and a DynamoDB table, and then you would test the access of an IAM role by creating a Lambda function and then testing that Lambda function. So first thing that you need to do for this lab is to first create an Amazon S3 bucket. So you can see I'm already logged into the console. I'm going to navigate to S3, select the S3 service, and now I will create a bucket. This bucket has to have a globally unique name. So I'm going to go ahead and name this MWSAA123. We'll see if that is good enough for it to be globally unique. We'll go ahead and leave this block all public access turned on, and we will click Create Bucket down at the bottom of the page. Now we can see that this bucket has been created. I'm going to go ahead and open this bucket and click on Properties. And from here, what I want to do is select or copy the ARN of this bucket, and I'm going to just keep a little scratch sheet here. So this is helpful for these labs, so that way you can remember all the important information. So our S3 bucket, this is our ARN, which includes the name of the bucket as well. So I'll just go ahead and drag this off the screen for now. So that's all we need to do for this piece. Next, what we want to do is create the DynamoDB table. So to do that, I'm going to type in DynamoDB up in the search bar and navigate to the DynamoDB console. And from here, I'm going to click Create Table. And then I'm going to give this table a name. I'm just going to call this table Example. And then I want to make sure I give this an ID, a partition key of ID. So partition key is essentially your unique identifier. So we're just going to go ahead and call this ID. And then we'll scroll down to the bottom and click Create Table, leaving the rest of the defaults. And here, all we need to do is note the name of the table. So I'm just making a section in here, and it's just called Example, so we remember the lowercase e. All right, drag that off the screen. And now what we need to do is find the existing IAM role and check out its permissions. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to IAM. Okay, so now I'm in the IAM dashboard, and I'm going to navigate to roles. And from here, I'm going to select Lab 1 role. Your role might be different, but we have this role here, Lab 1 role. And then what we have is we have a role that has full access to S3 and full access to DynamoDB. So that means that any entity that were to assume this role would have full access to reading and writing objects from S3 and items from DynamoDB. So you can click in here and you can view those policies if you would like. And what we need to do for this is to copy the ARN. So I'm going to bring back over my scratch pad, IAM, and throw the ARN in there. And we are going to use this ARN to modify the bucket policy for S3. So that is going to be the next step that we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this off screen. We will navigate back to S3 and select S3 here. And then we will select the bucket that we created and then permissions. So something to note about S3 is you need two different things to be able to make calls to S3. So like, let's say I have code running on an EC2 instance or inside of a Lambda function. The software development kit, the SDK, the code that's actually running on that instance or in that Lambda function needs access to temporary credentials to be able to sign the request that gets sent to S3. But you also need to be able to have the bucket policy allow the call. So right now there is no policy. So this means even if we tried to run our Lambda function to run a test to this S3 bucket, even if the Lambda function had the permission, it would be blocked at the bucket policy level. So we need to edit this bucket policy. And then I'm going to use the policy generator here. It's a lot easier to use the policy generator than it is to try to write them from scratch. So the first thing here is select the policy type. We want to select an S3 bucket policy. Then we have adding statements to that policy. We want to add an allow statement because we're trying to allow that IAM role. So then who is the principal? The principal is who would be making the request to S3, and that would be any entity that has assumed this role. So I'm going to copy that ARN, paste it in here with the principal, And then for action, I'm going to select all actions just to make this easier. However, in the real world, you would likely want to select just some very specific actions. And then we also need to then put the Amazon resource name or the ARN in for the S3 bucket as well, which we also have in Scratch here, my little Scratch pad. And then I will paste that there. Then let's click Add Statement and then generate policy. All right, so this is our policy. You can see we have action S3 allow, effect, or S3 star, effect is allow. The resource, so what are we allowing the action to be performed against, is our S3 bucket. And then who is allowed to perform that action is our principal, which is our IAM role. So that looks good. We can now exit out of this. I copied that policy, and I'll paste it over here. And then we will click Save Changes. All right, so now we have our bucket policy in place. Now what we need to do is create a Lambda function to test the role's access to both DynamoDB and S3. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to Lambda. And from here, I will create a function. We're going to author this function from scratch. And then I'm going to name this test role. You can name it, whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and select Python 3.9. And then I will open up this dropdown before I click next. And I'm going to change the default execution role to use an existing role. And that's going to be the lab1 role because we are trying to test the permissions that this role grants. So this execution role is what the Lambda will assume. So what types of permissions are we going to have once this Lambda executes? We're going to have the permissions that are contained in the lab1 role, which is both S3 full access and DynamoDB full access. So we should be able to write some code that inserts records into DynamoDB and uploads objects to S3. And this permission set here should allow us to perform those tasks. So now I click Create Function. And the next thing we need to do is set up two environment variables. And the first environment variable name is going to be DynamoDB table name. So what we need to do is click on Configuration and then Environment Variables, click Edit, and now we can add an environment variable. So the first one is DynamoDB table name, and we know that our table name is example. And then we need to add a second environment variable here as well. And this is S3 bucket name. And this S3 bucket is called MWSA123. You would have your own global unique variable name here. And then we'll click Save. And now what we need to do is we need to go back to the code and we will copy and paste the provided code into this Lambda function here. So just to kind of give you some background on this code, we are getting the resource for both DynamoDB and S3 here. And this is going to allow us to make API calls to these services through the code. Then we are constructing a message that says hello from AWS Lambda. We're constructing some information that we need to upload an object to S3. Then we are putting an item in the DynamoDB table. And the way that it knows what DynamoDB table to pull from is based off of this environment variable. We're uploading something with a hard-coded ID of 12345, and then the message is hello from AWS Lambda. So again, this is just to test the access. And then we also have here we're getting the S3 bucket based off of the environment variable that we created. And then we're putting an object based off of this information that we had up here. And the string that we should be able to see in that object is hello from AWS Lambda. All right, so now what we need to do is deploy this code. Okay, your changes have been deployed. And now we need to test this code. I'm going to leave all this test information default, except for the event name. You have to give it a name. So I'll just put test. This could be blanked. You could leave what's in here. It doesn't really matter for this particular use case because we're not pulling any information off of the incoming request. So here, I'm just going to leave it as default and click create. And now what I want to do is click test. All right, and we can see that we have a response, status code 200, so that looks great. However, what we need to do now is go actually verify that we created an item in DynamoDB and that we uploaded an object to S3. So let's check S3 first.
Navigating to S3 and opening up our bucket here, you can see that we now have a folder, which we didn't have before. And we also have this hello.txt, which if I download this, it should say hello from AWS Lambda, which it does. So that's great. It looks like this portion worked. So this means that the IAM role had the correct permissions. We assigned the role to the Lambda function, and we also had the correct S3 bucket policy. So that's great. But now what we also want to do is come over to DynamoDB and select the items that are in the table. So we'll click Tables, and then click on the example table, and then click View Items. And from here, I'm just going to perform a scan, which will pull back everything in the table. So if we click Run here, you can then see down below we have our ID 12345 and hello from AWS Lambda. So it looks like this one worked out. This is one of the ways that you could have completed this lab. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.